In 1996, a young mother, Rachel Timmerman, accepted a ride home from a man she had recently met. But when they reached her house, he didn't stop. Instead, he ordered his nephew and friend out before speeding off to an isolated road where he assaulted Rachel. Desperate to escape, she pretended to enjoy it and convinced him to return to her house, where she quickly locked him out. Enraged, he pounded on the door, threatening to harm her daughter if she told anyone. When Rachel pressed charges, the man, Marvin Gabriel, retaliated by accusing her of drug use while on probation. She was sentenced to 5 months in jail. 9 days later, Marvin was arrested for the attack on Rachel, but the terror wasn't over. Upon her release, a persistent caller from the restaurant where she worked kept asking her on a date. She initially declined, but eventually agreed. The man insisted she bring her baby, saying he loved children. Rachel left home excited, hopeful for a fresh start, but she never returned. Days later, her father received a letter in her handwriting. The date went so well, we decided to get married and move to Arkansas. He was suspicious, but wanted to believe it was real. Until 2 fishermen made a grim discovery: Rachel's body, bound in chains and weighed down with cinder blocks at the bottom of Oxford Lake. Her daughter, Shannon, was never found. Unbeknownst to Rachel, the man who she went out on a date with was working for Marvin. It was his plan all along to unalive her and her daughter. Later, Marvin Gabriel was arrested and was sentenced to death.
No child should come out of a sleepover looking like this. One of them filmed and shouted instructions while the others tortured her. How she managed to survive is insane. It was March 2023 in Queensland, Australia. Kira Hart was a sweet 14-year-old girl from the area, and like other teenage girls, she just wanted to be liked and accepted. Sadly though, the girls that befriended her were pure evil. Now these were 3 girls between the ages of just 12 and 14. Chloe Denman was the youngest, and then there was sisters Shania and Renisha Gresh. Like I said, Kira really was a very sweet girl. She always saw the best in people, but these girls had an absolute night of horror lined up for her. Now these 3 girls did seem like bad news. They were constantly posting stuff online that was honestly just so inappropriate. The one girl was like posting a video at one point claiming she was HIGH, and they were always just like posting in ridiculously revealing outfits. Now for some reason these girls were left home alone on the night of this sleepover, so honestly they just had free reign to do whatever the hell they wanted. I am stunned that Kira survived. Now we know a lot of the sick and twisted details of this evening because the girls decided to film it. As soon as Kira stepped through the door, she was tied up with a phone cable. They started kicking her, punching her, stabbing her with sharp items. And one of them at one point was like filming and shouting instructions, and the others were just obliging and torturing this young girl. They were supposed to be her friends, and they were unleashing absolute hell. They were laughing at her, calling her ugly, shouting the C word at her. Honestly, I've never heard young girls be so aggressive in my life. She was begging, she was saying, "I'll do anything, please just stop." One held a knife to her throat and said, "Don't think I won't." This hell went on for over 4 hours. 4 hours of sheer terror. Kira was convinced that they were going to kill her, and I can totally see why. She knew she just needed to stay alive. She was like, oh my god, I've got a little 3-year-old brother. I want to get home to see him, and my mum. Now this whole case is sickening, obviously, but something that makes it even more chilling to me is how funny these young girls found this. One even posted this sick video online, and when it started to get thousands and thousands of views, she wrote, "Going viral, thanks guys, love ya." But before they let her go, they threatened her, "If you tell anybody that this was us that did this to you, we know where you live and we know you have a mum and a little brother." But it doesn't make sense to me because they were bragging online that they'd done this. One even posted online that 4 hours attacking Kira was funny as F. When Kira finally made it home and showed up at her doorstep, her mum didn't even recognize her. Her face was so swollen and beaten up, it took a while for her mum to register this was Kira. She had a broken nose, a broken jaw, and her eyes were so swollen she could barely see. Now initially she lied to her mum for her own safety. She was panicking and she said she'd just merely been attacked on her way to the sleepover, but after she was rushed to hospital, the truth came out. And the news was reporting on this immediately, but they were keeping the young girls' names anonymous. Locals were enraged by this. Loads of people were saying if you're adult enough to make adult decisions like torturing somebody nearly to death, you're adult enough to take the consequences. They were like, we don't care, we're going to post her name's online. Kira had emergency surgery and thankfully did survive. Just, oh my god, the most brave girl ever. It's confusing online to the actual facts of the case of whether the girls spent any time behind bars at all for this sickening crime. Some reports do say that 2 of the girls were arrested, but I can't find anything for sure. And shockingly, this wasn't the first violent attack that one of them had been involved in. Just days before, it's reported that Renisha got into a vicious altercation on a school bus. But locals weren't going to let this slide. They were like, we're going to take matters into our own hands. They actually showed up to the house where the sleepover took place and burnt it to the ground. Now, I totally get wanting to hold these girls accountable for the sick things that they did, but apparently the house was rented accommodation anyway, so I just kind of feel bad for the landlord.
When I first saw this picture online, I remember looking at it and thinking something really eerie is going on there. Something really strange is happening. And I was right. Something terrible was happening. Today, we're not only talking about a baby, we're also talking about mental health and psychosis and all of the things that come along with that. So if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video. I will see you in my next one. I mean it. Take care of yourselves. I love you. In 2008, Romekia Sims and James Lee met at a basketball game in Clinton in Maryland. James was working as a security guard and Romekia was there, I believe, just attending the game. But the entire night was spent with them giving each other specific looks. Sooner than later, they struck up a conversation and the rest is history. Throughout the following week, they began talking more and more. They started dating and they started talking about the future that they could have together. It was all new and fresh. It was something really exciting. And by 2010, Romekia found out that she was pregnant. The 2 of them were very excited. Although their living situations were not ideal for starting a family, Romekia was still living at home and James had a roommate because their finances were not quite where they needed them to be in order to move out. But that aside, they were really looking forward to starting a new life together and creating a little family of their own. And then in August of 2011, they welcomed a baby boy into the world that they named Jair Donnell Lee. And from the moment that baby entered the world, he was surrounded by nothing but love, mainly from his parents. They were overjoyed now being a family of 3. They ended up moving into their own 2-bedroom apartment eventually, and that was great. And every other family member was also over the moon now having a new baby in the family. All the aunts and uncles and the cousins and everyone spent as much time as they could with this baby because he was just a bundle of joy. However, the little happy bubble that they were in would not last forever because in 2013, cracks started to show in Romekia and James's relationship. They started bickering more than usual about things that may sound silly but very normal things like chores and responsibility and bills and all that kind of stuff. And by 2014, they made the difficult decision to separate. James moved out. Romekia and her baby stayed living in that 2-bedroom apartment. And following the breakup, James knew that no matter the situation, he was always going to make sure to show up for his son. He continued to stay in regular contact with them, but he also was helping out financially. He was showing up in every single way that he could. However, for Romekia, the same couldn't be said. She found herself struggling a lot. She wasn't only stressed out, but she was also extremely overwhelmed because she had a job. She was also attending school, all while trying to keep a social life with her friends and her family and raising a toddler. It was a lot, and it took a really big mental toll on her, and unfortunately, those struggles would lead to the unthinkable. By 2014, Romekia had lost her job, which only added on to the stress she was already feeling, and her loved ones started to notice a pretty big shift in her behavior. We later find out that this is also around the time when she said that she started hearing voices in her head. Romekia began feeling paranoid every single day at every hour of the day. She started to feel like someone was following her and out to get her, which only made her paranoia grow, and sooner than later, she also began having hallucinations. She would hear the doorbell ring when it wasn't ringing. She began seeing people standing outside of her apartment that were not really there, and she began to believe that people were stalking her and Jair at night. One day in 2015, she called her mother in a panic, screaming into the phone that there were people trying to break into her house, trying to get to her and Jair, and her mother rushed over to the apartment, only to find that Romekia and Jair were safe inside and no one else was there. And after receiving CCTV footage from the apartment building, it was confirmed that no one had been there. No one had been there around her apartment. No one tried to break in. It was all part of Romekia's hallucinations. And throughout the following weeks, her hallucinations and delusions only started to get worse. Until Romekia was someone that her friends and family didn't even recognize anymore. She was scared all the time. She was always on edge. She never wanted to leave her apartment. She never wanted to leave her son. It was a very difficult time for everyone involved. And also in 2015, Romekia made a very similar call to James, panicking on the phone, telling him that people were trying to break down the door, that people were trying to come into the apartment to take Jair. The phone call was so frantic that it made James's stomach sink. He was at work at the time, so he couldn't leave, but he immediately called Romekia's mom and asked her to rush over there, and she did. But as soon as she got there, it was the same thing. there were absolutely zero signs that someone had attempted to break in, and Romikia was inside, frightened, holding onto her baby in her arms, refusing to say anything. It was clear that she was in some form of distress. She was having a hard time even forming a sentence, and when her mom first arrived, she didn't even recognize her at first. It took her a while to realize that the lady that was standing in front of her was her own mom. That same day, Romikia's mom, Tasha, helped her into the car and she drove her to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. She was extremely worried about her daughter, and she knew that whatever was going on would require medical attention. After a series of tests and observations, Romikia Seams was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and severe depression, and she was given medication for it. Medication that she very much needed, and even though it was really hard, her mom and James were glad that they were now aware of what was going on and they could help treat it. And they were very hopeful that the medication would help stabilize all of the voices in her head. Tasha, Romikia's mom, offered for her and Jair to come and stay with her, understanding that that was probably what was going to be best for everyone. Not only so Tasha could help out in taking care of Jair, but also so she could be there to make sure that Romikia was taking her medication every single day like she was supposed to. However, at the time, Tasha was living in a motel room, and having 2 adults and a baby in one single room wasn't really the ideal situation either. So there were frequent arguments between Romikia and her mom. Romikia also decided that she didn't like to take her medication on a regular basis because she felt as if it wasn't doing anything. So she would stop taking it, and her mom tried to do everything in her power to try and get her to take them again, but it was just growing tension between the two of them, and their arguments would often escalate until they got physical. In March of 2015, one of their arguments got so bad that Romikia stormed out of the motel room, taking Jair with her. She also told her mom that she was going to be taking a taxi to go and see James, and her mom Tasha then called James to let him know about this, and James stayed up. He waited and waited for Romikia and his son to show up, but they never did. And understanding how dangerous the situation could be, James got in his car and he started driving around to see if he could find them anywhere. And he did. Romikia, in the middle of an episode, was walking down the highway barefoot in the dark in the freezing cold, holding Jair in her arms. She told James that she had gotten a taxi, but that once she was sitting inside of it, she felt like people were watching her, and she once again felt like everyone was out to get her and Jair. And in a panic, she opened up the taxi door while the car was still moving, and she jumped out with Jair in her arms to walk the rest of the way, even though you could tell she wasn't even really sure where she was going. As soon as James found them, he took them to the hospital, and there it was confirmed that Romikia had not been taking her medication. They were both treated, both released, but that incident only left James and Romikia's mom even more concerned. They had been worried for some time already, but now they feared that Romikia would be capable of putting not only herself but also Jair in really dangerous situations if she did not take her medicine, and they also knew that getting her to take it was difficult in itself. So that same month, James filed for full custody of Jair, stating that Romikia was not in the right state of mind to be able to take care of herself, let alone their toddler. Yet for some reason, the courts decided that she was fit to take care of both herself and her 3-year-old son. So they kept joint custody, and Jair was to spend 1 week with his mom and 1 week with his dad, but only days after that hearing in court, little Jair would pass away. By May 18th of 2015, Romikia had stopped taking her medication completely, and she was so lost in her own head that her family members did not recognize who she was at all. They tried to help, especially James and her mom, but you can only do so much to try and force an adult to try and get them to do what you want them to do. But Romikia was experiencing extreme hallucinations and delusions, and she thought that her and Jair were endangered 24/7, that people were out to get them. The following week, Jair was supposed to spend the week at his father's house, but he would never get to, because on May 20th, Romikia disappeared, and she took Jair with her. She took her son to the Willis Memorial Park. She walked over to the swing set. She put him on a swing, and she began pushing him on the swing for hours and hours and hours. That entire day, she never stopped pushing. Even once it started to get dark, the temperature started to drop, and eventually it also started to rain, but Romikia continued swinging the swing. The entire day, throughout the night, into the next morning, and into the next day, she never stopped. She kept pushing the swing, and people saw her, but nobody did anything. Nobody wanted to intervene. She kept going, and she later stated that the voices in her head were yelling at her to just keep pushing, and that's exactly what she did. By the next morning, 3-year-old Jair was unresponsive, and by the second night, he was gone. Romikia did not change her movements once. She didn't stop. She did not move. She did not react, didn't do anything, even after her son was no longer alive. 2 days later, on May 22nd at 7 a.m., finally, someone called the cops to report that Romikia had been standing there in the exact same spot, pushing her son on the swing set for hours, for days. And as soon as the officers got to the park, they knew immediately that Jair had been gone for hours. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. A medical examiner later ruled that he passed away due to dehydration and low body temperature, and his cause of death was ruled a homicide due to neglect. Even when authorities got there and stopped her, Romikia remained completely numb. She had no reaction to anything. She was completely out of it, unresponsive and unaware of anything happening around her. When James was told that his son was gone, he felt heartbroken. He felt like he had failed his son. He felt devastated that only days before he had tried to argue in court that Romakia was not stable enough to take care of him, and yet the court did not listen to him. All of her other family members were also shocked and sad and mad, and they couldn't make sense of it. Her mom also was drowning in guilt, thinking that she should have done more to help her daughter. Romakia was taken to the hospital, where it was ruled that she was in a complete state of psychosis. Meanwhile, authorities were working on this case, deciding whether or not they were going to be able to find Romakia responsible for this or not because of her mental state. And in July of 2015, Romakia Sims was charged with and reckless endangerment. Evaluations found that she suffered from a mental disorder which at the time of the incident caused her to, quote, lack substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality of her conduct or to conform her behavior to meet the requirements of the law, end quote. And in early 2016, she was found not criminally responsible for her child's under Maryland law. And rather than being sent to a prison, she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for an indefinite period of time, or until the doctors ruled that she was no longer a danger to herself and those around her. From what I could find, it sounds like she is still in hospital under strict supervision, but I couldn't find reliable sources to confirm that with 100% certainty. Yeah, every single aspect of this case is terrible. It's so sad, everything about it. So thank you if you made it to the end. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to little Gier's story. I hope that you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
These teenage boys killed their teacher because they got a bad grade in her class. Noema Graber was a fantastic woman. She was originally from Mexico, born in Veracruz on November 10th, 1954. She was a flight attendant for 17 years, and that's where she really developed a passion for travel and flying. And that's when she decided to do something that was practically unheard of for a woman in 1970, and that was to start training to become a pilot. And Noema Graber became the first woman in Mexico and one of the first women in the entire world to be trained to be a commercial airline pilot. She was an extremely impressive, passionate, hardworking person. In 1986, Noema married an old flame that she met while she was in high school. Paul Graber hit her up when he was on a business trip in Mexico. They reconnected, and the rest was history. The couple moved to Paul's hometown in America, Fairfield, Iowa, a small rural town. There they raised their 3 children, and after Noema's kids were grown, she had trouble staying still. So when Noema was in her 50s, she decided to have a career change. She went back to college. She got a bachelor's degree in English to become a teacher. Noema became a Spanish teacher at the local high school, and by 2021 she was teaching Spanish at Fairfield High School, and she was truly loved by everyone, but especially her students. Noema was a creature of habit. Every single day after school she would wind down by taking a little stroll in the local park, but on November 2nd, 2021, she never came home. And her loved ones were immediately concerned. They're calling her, she's not picking up. They drive by the school and the park. There's no signs of her or her van, so they report her missing. The following day, on November 3rd, an extensive search was done of the park, and tragically later that day, the body of 66-year-old mother of 3 Spanish teacher Noema Graber was found in the park. Noema had been beaten to death, and her body was hidden off of the park under a tarp and under a wheelbarrow. And later that day, her van was found abandoned miles away on a dirt road in town. Extremely quickly, over half a dozen people came forward, all pointing fingers at the same people. It all started when police got word that about 45 minutes after Noema was usually starting her walks at the park, her van was seen being driven around by 2 teenage boys. And then some of the students at the high school started coming forward, all pointing fingers at the same 2 teenage boys. The day that their Spanish teacher's body was found, one of the students came forward saying the night before, which was the night that she was murdered, one of their classmates were sending them some really bizarre Snapchats. The first one was a bottle of bleach that read, "Time to hide a body." The next one showed the boy in a mask, and the Snapchat read, "POV, you're my Spanish teacher, and this is the last thing you see." The next one was, "No, I'm actually ready, here we go," and then "New wheelbarrow, who this?" These Snapchats were all sent by Fairfield High School student 16-year-old Jeremy Goodell. 16-year-old Jeremy came from a very bad home life. He was the youngest of 5 kids, pretty much being raised by his older sister in a situation that honestly really reminds me of the show Shameless. The parents were extremely neglectful. The mom pretty much abandoned the family to be with some other guy, and the home was in really poor condition and was really dirty. And then more and more students started going to the police with concerns about Jeremy's best friend, another 16-year-old high school student, Willard Chaden Miller. Willard had apparently been saying at school for weeks and maybe even months that he hated his Spanish teacher and she might just get up and disappear one day. Willard was saying that he was stalking his Spanish teacher after school so he could memorize her schedule, that his Spanish teacher ruined his life, that he hated her and he wanted her dead. Willard was really angry with the Spanish teacher, Noema Graber, because he got an F in her class, and that brought his GPA down and also made it so he couldn't join the Spanish class for a trip to Spain that summer. Willard was seen in school a lot arguing with Miss Graber over this F, but she wouldn't change it just because he wanted her to. What started as just dark jokes became real plans to murder his teacher. And Willard began asking all of his friends to help him kill their teacher, and his best friend, Jeremy Goodell, agreed, and they started planning her murder for weeks. And that day, on November 2nd, they followed her to the park that she always went to after school, and they took turns beating her to death with a baseball bat. Both boys were brought in for questioning, and Willard probably had the strangest story I've ever heard for the police. He said that day he was at that park, he saw his teacher, they waved at each other, they said hi to each other, but then a group of masked teenage boys jumped out and forced Willard to watch them murder his teacher, also forced Willard to help murder his teacher, and then also forced Willard to hide her body. Yeah, he actually tried to go with that story. There was so much evidence against these boys. In a search of both of their homes, they found bloody clothes, strands of their teacher's hair, and also a bloody baseball bat, which was the murder weapon. And on Willard's phone, in his notes app, he planned the entire murder. I'm gonna read it out to you, so I'm gonna be looking this way. In his notes app, he wrote prep, and under prep, he wrote bush clippers, sticks, garden gloves, plastic trash bag, Ziploc bag, wet wipes, backpack, hammer, cover, transport vehicle. Stun, move off trail, empty compartments, load cargo, blanket cargo, deactivate compartment contents, leave bag by exit, transport, empty transport, safety stun, switch gloves, deactivate article to bag, finalize the win, secure victory, load into storage spot, don't forget to close the door to the ground, switch gloves, move the sticks, wipe down the tools, dispose article, and grab bag by exit, done. In this time, Willard was also using his phone to Google the most guilty Google searches I've ever read. Willard Googled, do students receive credit for class if the teacher is seriously injured or dies more than halfway through the course? He also Googled, what happens to students' work if the teacher dies in the middle of the term? Both boys tried to blame the other one for their teacher's murder, and both of them originally pled not guilty. But Jeremy later changed his plea to guilty and even agreed to testify against his best friend. But after hearing that, Willard also changed his plea to guilty, so neither of them went to trial. The state of Iowa does not sentence juvenile criminals to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So Jeremy Goodell in November of 2023 was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For what it's worth, even though in my opinion I don't think it's worth a lot, Jeremy does at least seem remorseful for killing his teacher, or at least a lot more remorseful than Willard does. Jeremy says that he does not know why he helped his best friend kill Noema Graber. He said that he took her class, he passed her class, and thought that she was a nice teacher. The general consensus amongst the public is that Willard Miller was the mastermind and also the driving force in this murder scheme, and his best friend Jeremy, who came from a bad home, kind of just went along with it. Willard's mother has continued to defend her son, even saying that Noema Graber's class was too hard. I don't know why that matters at all. That doesn't make it okay to kill your teacher. And she tried to get her son's interrogation and entire case thrown out completely. Willard Miller was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years, and his judge said in his case that if Iowa allowed life in prison without the possibility of parole for juveniles, it's something that he would have really considered During both boys' sentencing, they both took the opportunity to get up and apologize to Noema's family, but when it came to Willard, it seemed like he was trying not to laugh and that he was like smiling and just not genuine at all.
I would like to take this opportunity to wholeheartedly accept responsibility for the role that I've played in the murder of Nefew McGraber. I would like to apologize for my actions, first and foremost, to the family. I'm sincerely sorry for the distress that I've caused you and the devastation I've caused your family. And from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to hear about Paul Graber.
I know this was a long video, so if you made it to the end, thank you so much for listening to Noema Graber's story. My heart truly goes out to her family and all of her loved ones. She really did seem like a remarkable woman. While you're in the comments, please remember to always be respectful. You do not know who's in the comments. Someone that knew and loved Noema in real life could be in the comments, so please be respectful. While you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that I cover Noema's story today, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. This girl killed her stepfather, and you will never guess why she did it. This case is wild, it's very compelling, and slightly controversial. This is Jade Jenks, and when Jade was only 3 months old, her parents divorced, and she lived with her father full-time, mainly because her mom was an addict, and Jade would still see her mom from time to time until her mom just stopped calling and visiting altogether. Until Jade was 14 and she got a random phone call from her mom who told her that not only had she gotten married, but she was pregnant. This is obviously shocking for Jade, but she was also excited to be a big sister, and her mom told her that she had gotten sober and she wanted all of them to be a big family. So that's when Jade, at 14 years old, met her stepfather, 41-year-old Tom Merriman. And when Jade's baby brother Cash was born, everything was so good for a little bit, because sadly Jade's mom would relapse. She fell off the deep end, she was angry and violent, and she wasn't caring for Jade's baby brother Cash anymore. There was this one incident where Cash was supposed to start kindergarten, and he was so excited for his first day of school. He got himself up and ready for school, but the night before, his mom had gotten so high and drunk that she was just passed out, and she never woke up to take Cash to school, so he missed his first day that he was so excited for. And shortly after that, Jade's mom actually got arrested, and this was a breaking point for everyone. Jade and Tom took Cash and they just left, and the three of them were living together as their own little family. And Jade, at only 18 years old, became like a full-time parent to her younger brother. Jade and her stepdad Tom became so close at this time. Tom saw Jade as a daughter, and Jade saw Tom as like a second dad. But you know, she still had her biological father, who she was really close to because he had pretty much raised her all alone. And Tom got kind of weirdly jealous over Jade's biological father. After 5 years of Jade, her stepdad Tom, and her little brother all living together, Jade decided it was time for her to move out, just move on with her own life. And around that exact same time, Jade's mom was out of prison, sober, got full custody of Cash, and left. So there wasn't really any reason for Jade to see her stepdad Tom anymore. Tom has gone from having a daughter and a son to having no one. He was completely alone. He lost everything. He was crushed. He was devastated. And he actually turned to abusing alcohol and substances himself. But on the other hand, Jade was living her best life. She started her own interior design company, which was so successful and worth millions. By April of 2020, Jade was in her mid-30s and she moved to a new house outside of San Diego, which was coincidentally just a few doors down from her old stepdad Tom. The two of them reconnected. They got really close again. They were like father and daughter again. Tom told Jade that no one would ever love her as much as he did. And Tom is in his 60s now. He has a lot of health problems on top of his alcohol and substance abuse, and Jade became like his full-time caregiver. And in December of 2020, Tom got drunk and he actually fell down and broke some of his ribs and was being treated in the hospital. Jade wanted to do something nice for her stepdad. She wanted to deep clean his entire house so he would come home to this nice clean house. And this is how Jade found a secret that her stepfather was hiding that would change everything. Because when Jade went to clean off Tom's desk, the computer on the desk was like asleep. So when she kind of hit the mouse, the computer screen lit up. And the screensaver on the computer was a photo of a bare woman's chest, okay, no clothes. And Jade realized that the photo on her dad's computer was a photo of herself. Jade goes through her stepdad Tom's computer and she finds over 100 photos of herself with no clothes on, and they were organized in folders by which body part was showing. And to make it even worse, some of the photos were of Jade when she was a teenager. It has been reported differently how Tom got these photos of Jade. Some say that he got them by stealing an SD card from her computer, while others say that he hacked into her iCloud and downloaded the photos from her iCloud, while other sources say that Tom got some of the photos from hidden cameras he put up in his house. This is so shocking and disgusting for Jade to see. She's known this man since she was 14 and he was 41. This was a man that she trusted, that she called dad. Everything was a lie, and now she's afraid of him. She actually starts calling some of her friends for advice and for help, and they tell her to go to the police, but she doesn't. Instead, Jade reached out to a man that she never met before named Alan, but also known as the Fixer. A man that could fix any problem you had, no matter how big or small it was, for the right price. About a week later, when it was time to pick Tom up from the hospital, Jade believed that her and the Fixer had a plan to solve her Tom problem, but also to get revenge. Jade picked Tom up at the hospital on December 31st, 2020. Tom had been prescribed some painkillers and some sleeping pills, and within 10 minutes of picking Tom up from the hospital, Jade texted the Fixer, quote, "I just dosed the hell out of him," and she would be going to a store to stall until Alan, the Fixer, was ready. And at that store, Jade bought what I could only describe as a murder kit: zip ties, towels, gloves, and rope. And then Jade waited for a text from the Fixer, a text that wouldn't come. So eventually she decides to just wait it out at Tom's house. She actually tries to get Tom out of her car, but at this time Tom is unconscious because he's been dosed with painkillers and prescription medication and sleeping pills. He's dead weight. Jade tries pulling him out of her car, but he's just collapsed now in his own driveway. Jade's panicking and she's blowing up the Fixer's phone. "Where are you? I can't get him in the house. What should I do?" But the Fixer has just ghosted Jade. Jade is panicking and she starts texting anyone that she can think of, including her ex-boyfriend named Adam. She tells him, "Help. My stepdad, he's drunk. He's passed out in the driveway. Can you come help me?" But her ex-boyfriend Adam was actually busy at the time. So Jade starts blowing up the Fixer's phone again. "He's waking up. I don't want to have to be the one to do this." After 3 hours of Tom pretty much passed out in his own driveway, the Fixer finally texts back Jade. He tells her, "I'm busy, but I'll send my business partner to come help you," a man named Brian, the business partner. Jade is frustrated. She doesn't feel comfortable getting anyone else involved, but the Fixer tells her, "Just throw him some money and I'll give him some of the money that you've already given me." It's clear that this is some kind of murder for hire plot. But allegedly, Alan, the Fixer, never told Brian, the business partner, that this was a hitman situation. So when Brian, the business partner, shows up to help Jade and she tells him, "I need you to strangle my stepdad and I'll take care of the rest," Brian, the business partner, allegedly had no idea and he just ran out of there. This is so messy and Jade is obviously panicking. Her plan to murder her stepdad is just not going well. Jade starts texting the Fixer again. "Where did your business partner go? Where are you? I need your help. He's starting to wake up. I'm about to club him." And then at 7:30 that evening, 8 hours after Jade picked Tom up from the hospital, Jade's ex-boyfriend Adam, who she texted earlier to help her, but he was busy, finally came over. He has no idea what's going on, and when he gets there, Jade is panicking, she's distraught, she's a wreck, because at that point, she had already taken things into her own hands. At that point, Tom was already dead. And Jade just immediately confesses everything to her ex-boyfriend Adam. The picture she found on her stepdad's computer, the Fixer, the plan, that she drugged him but he wasn't dying fast enough. So she put a plastic bag over his head to suffocate him, but then when that wasn't working, she began to choke him. She asks her ex-boyfriend Adam to help bring her stepdad Tom's body inside into his bed to stage it like he OD'd. But just like the business partner, Adam just ran out of there and he called the police the next morning. And the entire time, Jade is still blowing up the Fixer's phone and he's not answering her. "Am I alone in this? This doesn't end well for me. I need some help cleaning up the trash in the driveway. Can you send someone?" And that day, Jade Jenks was arrested, but she was not answering any questions. She wasn't saying anything. And investigators found Tom's body buried under a pile of trash in his own driveway. Jade was being charged with first-degree murder, and she pled not guilty. During her trial, she said that the plan with the fixer was just to confront Tom about the photos on his computer, but he took all those pills by himself, and he really did just OD, and she just panicked. The story obviously doesn't line up with the 70 pages of text messages that she sent Alan the fixer, but Jade said that those were just taken out of context, and Brian, the business partner, and her ex-boyfriend Adam were just lying. And Jade really believed that she was going to be found not guilty, I think mainly because Tom's autopsy showed that his cause of death really was substance poisoning and that there were no signs of strangulation. But I read somewhere that just because there's no signs of strangulation doesn't mean that there isn't, strangulation didn't happen, especially if he's unconscious and not fighting back. Ultimately, Jade was found guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Personally, if you're here for my opinion, I don't think that there's a doubt in my mind that this was a murder for hire plot and that Jade wanted her stepfather Tom dead. But there's a lot of controversy. People think that Jade is some kind of anti-hero and that the murder of Tom Merriman was justified. There's also a lot of people that think that there's more to the story, like more of a motive here, where finding photos of yourself like that, like photos without your clothes on someone that you saw as a father, is disgusting and disturbing and shocking and a huge betrayal. But there's a lot of people that don't think that that's, murder worthy. And a lot of people think that there's more to the story. There's more of a reason why Jade wanted her stepfather dead. Interestingly enough, years ago, when Jade's mom filed for divorce from Tom, she actually said that she found her very young daughter in a compromising position with her husband Tom, meaning that at some point Jade and her stepfather did have some kind of relationship. Whether or not you believe Jade's mom or not, that's completely up to you. I'm not saying I believe that, I'm just saying what I found. But really interested to get your guys' take on this case. This was a wild ride, and I really hope it all made sense. Please let me know all your thoughts and theories and questions in the comment section. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, love you guys so much. You guys have no idea how much. And until then, see you guys tomorrow with another video.
I can guarantee you that you will never hear of a more bizarre missing person case than this, because not only did this little boy just vanish off the face of the earth, but 3 years later, a 23-year-old French man claimed to be him and even lived with the family for months. And for some reason, they actually thought that this man was their missing little boy, despite looking and sounding nothing like him. This is the mysterious disappearance of Nicholas Barclay and the imposter who claimed to be him, Frederick Borden. This is truly so bizarre, and I cannot stop thinking about it. So let's talk about it. Nicholas Barclay was 13 years old when he mysteriously disappeared on June 10th, 1994. He was last seen playing basketball at a park with some of his friends in San Antonio, Texas, and this park wasn't very far away from his home. But that afternoon, Nicholas called his mom for a ride home, only she wasn't the one who answered. It was his older half-brother named Jason. Jason was in his 20s at the time and lived with Nicholas and their mom. At this point, their mom was still asleep as she worked graveyard shifts at a local convenience store, and Jason really didn't want to go and pick Nicholas up, so he told Nicholas to walk the 1.5 miles home. So with no other option, Nicholas started to walk back home, but he mysteriously disappeared after this, and no one would ever see him again. At first, no one seemed to notice that Nicholas was missing, and this was for a few reasons. One reason is that his mom and older brother Jason struggled with substance abuse, and on top of that, Nicholas didn't have a great home life. He was known to be a really troubled kid. He fought with his mom a lot, already had 3 tattoos at 13 years old, he would sometimes threaten his teachers, and it wasn't unusual for him to disappear for a few days at a time. Nicholas was also known to the police, and he already had a record of breaking and entering, stealing, and truancy. And with his mom and older brother using drugs, there were already a lot of domestic violence disturbance calls with the police. They were over at the house quite often, so with all of this combined, Nicholas's mom didn't actually realize that he was missing until 3 days later, which is when she officially reported him missing to the police. And because of the family history, authorities didn't really investigate at first. They kind of just thought that he ran away and would be back in a few days, and no one really seemed to care. His disappearance didn't even even get reported in the local news. Police thought that Nicholas may have just ran away because he was scheduled for a court hearing the following week due to his bad behavior, and it was likely that he would have either gone to juvie or be sent off to a group home. So in their minds, this was reason enough to not give this a proper investigation. But this is where the story takes a strange turn that absolutely no one could have expected. 3 months after Nicholas's disappearance, Jason called the police and told them that he just saw Nicholas trying to break into the home's garage. But when he realized he'd been seen, he ran away. When police arrived, they found no evidence that Nicholas was ever there, and soon the case would fall cold. But then, out of the blue, 3 years later, the Barclay family gets a call from authorities in Spain who say that they just found Nicholas in a youth shelter. Now 16, Nicholas told authorities that he'd been kidnapped by high-ranking government officials and forced into human trafficking in Europe. When he somehow escaped, he realized that he was in Spain and called for help. This was obviously devastating to hear that he'd been through all of that, but really the family was just overjoyed that Nicholas was alive. So Nicholas's older sister flew to Spain to pick him up and bring him home. But when she got there, she was a little shocked at what she saw. The Nicholas she remembered was no longer the Nicholas that was standing right in front of her. His appearance had completely changed. Instead of his blonde hair and blue eyes, he now had brown eyes with dark hair and a receding hairline. On top of this, Nicholas now spoke with a European accent, which obviously was not there before, seeing as though he grew up in Texas. Nicholas had an excuse for why everything had changed, though. He said that the people who kidnapped him performed experiments on him that changed the color of his eyes and hair. He then said that he, along with many other kids, were SA'd and forced to learn a new language, which is why he now had an accent. So Nicholas's sister believed him, and she flew back home with him, where he went on to live with the family for 5 months. And despite his new appearance, everyone in the family believed him and welcomed Nicholas home. After his bizarre return home, a local reality TV show caught wind of this insane story and actually got permission to film the family in their home for an upcoming episode. As usual, the team hired a PI to investigate and research his disappearance, but it didn't take long for this PI to become suspicious. He ended up comparing the new Nicholas's ears to an old photo of him and quickly found that they did not match. This is when he notified authorities of what was possibly going on, and when the FBI stepped in 1998, they took Nicholas's fingerprints and DNA, and what they found is honestly chilling. This was not Nicholas. In fact, this was a 23-year-old Frenchman named Frederick Borden, and he was known as a serial imposter. By the time he had assumed Nicholas's identity, he had already impersonated hundreds of children in more than a dozen countries, some of which were real missing kids, just like Nicholas. So Frederick was obviously arrested for this, and he pleaded guilty to passport fraud and perjury. He was sentenced to 6 years in a Texas prison, and once he was released in 2003, he went back to France and went on to assume the identity of another missing boy, 14-year-old Leo Bally, who had been missing since 1996. Of course, DNA eventually proved who he really was, and he was sentenced to 4 months in prison for this crime. It doesn't stop here though, because in 2005, Frederick went on to assume another young boy's identity. Now he was a 15-year-old boy, and he told everyone that he was a Spanish orphan. He said his parents were killed in a car accident, and he was somehow let into a high school where he spent an entire month. He was able to fool so many people by simply dressing like a teenager, and he trained himself to walk differently and used a ton of anti-aging cream. He even hid his receding hairline by wearing a hat. I seriously don't get how he pulled this off though, because to me he looks so old. But anyway, he spent an entire month in the school before a teacher saw a TV program about him and what he did. He was then kicked out. When asked why he did this, Frederick said that he's just looking for love and affection because he never received it as a kid. What's crazy is the fact that he went on to get married, although I think they have since separated. But before they did, they had 5 kids together. A true crime documentary was actually made about this called The Imposter, and it is seriously so disturbing. I talked about this on here a few years ago, and I didn't know it at the time, but Frederick had a TikTok account, and my video kind of went viral back then, which he saw. And then he started making reply videos to all of the people commenting from my video. It was honestly really crazy, and I didn't see me and The Imposter having beef on my bingo card. But if he does still have a TikTok, I want to make it clear that I personally don't condone any hate. So if he does, please don't go leaving any bad comments on my behalf. It's hard to remember with the craziness of the story, but Nicholas is still missing. Although we don't know exactly what happened to him, there are a few theories. Theory number 1 is that his family had something to do with it, either on accident or on purpose. He didn't have a great home life, and some think that his older brother could have been involved, but unfortunately we won't ever know, because Jason died a few years later following a drug overdose. It's never been proven if that was intentional or not. But some people think it looks a little suspicious, and maybe he possibly felt guilty or something. Even if he didn't do anything, he did tell Nicholas to just walk home that day. So that had to have been incredibly hard for him to process and deal with. Another theory is that he was met with foul play somehow, and according to his mom, Nicholas would often accept rides from strangers. So it's left her wondering if someone picked him up and then something bad happened after that. And then the last theory is that Nicholas just ran away. This could also be true due to his run-ins with the law so young, and with him not having a great home life. But I feel like this is unlikely because it's been so many years now with not a single clue turning up. If he was alive today, he'd be 44 years old. But it's now been 31 years, and whatever happened to Nicholas that summer night remains a mystery. It's scary when people vanish, yes, but what's terrifying to me is when someone disappears on vacation in a place they've never been before, and the last known footage is of them acting really strange. That's what happened to Lars Matank. He disappeared in the summer of 2014 after going on a vacation to Bulgaria, and for some reason during that trip he began acting incredibly paranoid. He was last seen running out of the airport into the forest, and this footage is so disturbing to me. Lars has become known as the most famous missing tourist in the world, and how he and so many others have just vanished into thin air without leaving behind a single clue really needs to be studied. So let's talk about it. Lars Matank was 28 years old when he mysteriously disappeared in 2014. He was born and raised in Germany and lived a pretty normal, quiet life. He worked at a local power plant and had a handful of really good friends and a girlfriend. He was living a pretty good life when his dad suddenly had a stroke. So after that, he pretty much spent every evening over at his parents' house helping his mom take care of his dad. They'd always been a pretty close family, but this really made them lean on each other and become even closer. But like anyone in their 20s, Lars wanted to travel and get a break from his regular life. At 28 years old, he had never once traveled outside of Germany, so he and his friends started planning a summer vacation. They settled on an Eastern European vacation to Bulgaria, and on June 30th, 2014, Lars and 5 of his friends boarded a plane to Varna, a seaside resort town on Bulgaria's Black Sea. They all stayed at Golden Sands, which is a really popular seaside resort just outside the city of Varna, and at first, everything was going great. They were having so much fun swimming in the pool, relaxing on the beach, and going out to local clubs and bars that their trip, according to them, was going by so fast. Lars seemed like his usual self, relaxed even, and in a good mood. Although his friends did say that he wasn't eating that much during the trip, which was odd. Lars would reportedly only eat small portions of food at a time, but overall this didn't seem like anything to worry about, so they carried on having a good time. But it wasn't until the last part of their trip that things started to get strange. On July 5th, 2014, just 2 days before they were all supposed to fly back home to Germany, Lars and his friends were at a local bar in Varna when, out of nowhere, Lars got into an argument with some other Germans who were at the bar. The argument was over football, or soccer to those of us in the States. I guess Lars took the sport very seriously, and the argument was serious enough that he and his friends left the bar and went to a nearby restaurant. It wasn't long after this, though, that Lars took off by himself, and his friends wouldn't see him for the rest of the night. The next morning, though, Lars made his way back to the resort, but his friends were a little shocked at his state. Lars told them that he had gone to a McDonald's after splitting up with them the night before, where he was then beaten up by 4 men. It's not clear whether these were just 4 random men or if they were the same men that he'd gotten into an argument with. But now Lars had an injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum, which was concerning to him and his friends because you really shouldn't fly with a ruptured eardrum. The pressure changes on a plane can further damage your ear, so Lars saw a doctor for this, and the doctor did advise against flying home the next day. The doctor also prescribed him an antibiotic called cefprozil. His friends were really worried about Lars, so they offered to skip the flight home and stay with him until he healed, but Lars refused, saying that he was okay and that they should continue on with their plans flying home on July 7th. So that's exactly what they did. He checked out of the resort at the same time as his friends, and then after, he checked into Hotel Color Varna for one night. The hotel wasn't the best, and it was in a pretty questionable part of town, but it was cheap and not far from the airport, so it seemed like an okay option. But not long after checking in, Lars began acting paranoid. He quickly called his mom at the hotel and was pretty frantic, but he was whispering that 4 men were trying to kill and rob him, and he also said how the hotel was so strange. He was so paranoid that the people following him got a hold of his bank information, so he asked his mom to cancel his credit cards for him and to look up the medication that he was taking. His poor mom was really worried about him, and she said that she could literally hear his heart beating through the phone. Throughout the rest of the day, Lars was seen on security footage at the hotel pacing up and down the hallways, looking out windows, and even hiding in the elevator. He was so paranoid that people were following him, but the odd part is that no one else was ever caught on the security footage. At around 1 a.m., Lars left the hotel and returned about an hour later, but what he was doing in that time frame is still a mystery. When he woke up in the morning, he called his mom once again and said that the people who were out to get him were getting closer. But despite this, Lars made it to the Varna airport on July 8th, 2014, which was the day that he was supposed to be flying back home to Germany. Once there, he texted his mom that he arrived at the airport, so this made her feel a lot better about the situation and kind of calmed her nerves a little bit. She sent him $600 in cash, which he never withdrew for some reason, and bought him a bus ticket for once he got back to Germany. But before he boarded the plane, Lars wanted to make sure one last time that it was safe for him to fly with his ruptured eardrum. So he visited the airport doctor, Dr. Kostov. Dr. Kostov examined Lars and gave him the okay to fly home, but Lars reportedly wouldn't leave his office. According to the doctor, Lars was acting nervous and erratic, and he asked the doctor about the medication that he was taking because he was concerned for some reason. It's important to note that at this point in time, the Varna airport was being partially renovated, so it wasn't unusual for construction workers to be roaming about, and that's exactly what happened that day. As Lars was talking to this doctor, a construction worker walked into the doctor's office, which made Lars tremble. Lars then yelled, quote, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." End quote. Before running out of the office. He left behind all of his luggage, including his wallet, phone, and passport. He was last seen on security cameras sprinting out of the airport, climbing a fence, and then running into the forest that's adjacent to the airport. After this, Lars vanished, and he's never been seen again. He was eventually reported missing, and there was a massive search for him, yet not a single clue was ever found as to what happened to him. With no luck from the police, Lars's mom hired a PI who checked every hospital in the area for any unidentified patients, but came up empty. So although we don't know what exactly happened to Lars after he ran from the airport that day, or what caused him to start acting paranoid, there are a few theories. Theory number one is that Lars suffered from some rare side effects from the medication that he was prescribed. This antibiotic can induce psychotic effects like hallucinations and paranoia, although it really isn't incredibly common. Some think that Lars was suffering from some kind of psychotic episode from this medication, which does align with his unusual behavior. But one thing that kind of disproves this is the fact that the airport doctor said that Lars hadn't even taken his medication. According to the doctor, Lars never even filled out his prescription, so his behavior, in his words, couldn't have been a result of that. It's weird that Lars called his mom and asked her to look up this medication, and then told the doctor that he was concerned about it if he never took it though. But to this day, it's not clear if he actually took it or not. Another theory is that Lars suffered from a mental breakdown of some sort. He didn't have a history of any mental illness, but he could have been going through a manic episode from something that was undiagnosed. The most confusing part of this case is the fact that we don't know how much of Lars's story is rooted in reality. No one really knows what happened after he left his friends that night, or if a fight really even took place. No one saw this fight, and no one has ever come forward about witnessing it or being a part of it. So whoever Lars claimed to have been beaten up by that day has never been found. His friends back then also reportedly didn't know how truthful Lars was with his story, because it appeared he gave different accounts of what happened when he was alone to a lot of them. Another theory is that Lars suffered head trauma, or maybe even had a concussion from being punched in the ear, and maybe he just ran off not in his right mind because of this and possibly died of exposure, or maybe a wild animal got him. The area where he went missing is pretty big, and he did run into a forest, but it's just odd that he hasn't been found by now, or any of his clothing for that matter. I feel like there would be some sign if he was attacked by an animal at some point. People from this area say that it is littered with cameras on every business and a lot of homes, so the fact that he wasn't ever captured on any footage after leaving the airport is terrifying. Another theory is that Lars was met with foul play. We know that Lars said that he got into a fight that night, but it is possible that he got into a fight with some pretty bad people, and the situation was more serious than anyone thought. That maybe his paranoia was real, and he really was being followed and watched, and then whoever it was struck after he ran out of the airport. And the last theory, one which his mom believes could be a real possibility, is that Lars is out there, alive somewhere. She believes that there's a good chance that he lost his memory and is just living somewhere not knowing who he really is. This was kind of backed up over the years following his disappearance when multiple people came forward and claimed to have seen Lars in several different countries. A more serious sighting was in 2019 when a truck driver picked up a hitchhiker in Varna. He later found out about Lars' disappearance, and it was then that he realized the person he picked up really resembled him, just an older version of him. Now he had long hair and a beard and really prominent cheekbones. Some think that he could have ran away to start a new life, but I doubt this. You have to remember that this was his first ever trip outside of his home in Germany. He wasn't an experienced traveler, and I feel like he would have felt overwhelmed running away, especially leaving behind his mom, who he was really close with. And he also left behind his passport, so he wouldn't have been able to get far. It seems likely to me that he could have had a mental breakdown, but even if he did, where is he? The fact that he's never been found is insanely sad and scary, and the fact that no one really knows what happened that caused him to start acting strange. But it's now been 11 years, and whatever happened to Lars that summer day remains a mystery.